Welcome. Contributor appreciation. I'm here by myself today. Mrs. Thomas is unconscious. She was tired. So today is debate night. There was no way I was going to be going to sleep tonight. That's bad English. My apologies. But there was no way I was going to bed tonight. Tonight, there's a certain energy about what's going to take place, potentially, because this is not going to be the same old stale debate where they're just going to be running over the same territory. Bloomberg is going to be in this race, which is going to add somewhat of an X factor from the standpoint of Warren, but also from the standpoint of Sanders, both of which may be looking to take a piece out of his hide. And I wouldn't even put Joe Biden and Buttigieg or Klobuchar to the side on this. They've been opening up attacks on Bloomberg over the weekend. None of them, no one in this race, liked the thought of Bloomberg spending $400 million. The next closest person is Sanders with $40 million. Like, it's astonishing. It's utterly astonishing. But we have several stories, or I have several stories that I want to go through for today before the debate starts, but also I kind of want to go through some of the contributor appreciation questions. So I'm going to stop this here. Let's flip it over to the other side and welcome to the contributor appreciation special. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal patron. So I got to start off with polling. So there was a lot of polling that came out yesterday. In fact, for the past maybe week or couple of weeks, there's been a lot of polling that has come out. Sanders, for the most part, has dominated all of the national polling, and most recent polling, double-digit leads. But not just that. So let's start here. There's going to be a debate tonight, of course. That debate is going to take place at 9 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken, Eastern time. Multiple candidates are going to be getting on that stage, and each campaign has something that they need to accomplish to make tonight a success. If your name is Bernie Sanders, you're probably feeling pretty good right about now. Ultimately, you're dominant in all of the polling, and the thing that they've chosen to attack you on is a heart attack, a conspiracy theory that you haven't released the information necessary concerning the heart attack, bringing up taxes from before, and your supporters. If this is the ammo that they have to hit you with, you should be feeling pretty goddamn good right about now. And again, not just that, domination in the polling. If your name is Biden or Warren, you better have concerns. Now, Joe Biden is skipping going to Nevada, and Joe Biden is going to focus his energies on South Carolina, meaning he is putting a last stand on South Carolina. Now, this makes sense to some degree, kind of, and to be honest, not entirely, even though I understand the logic of it. His campaign is broke, so he can't necessarily have this multi-state fistfight. And with South Carolina, at one point, Joe Biden was winning South Carolina by like 20, 30 points. So this was his stronghold, his black wall, as some people may call it. But what about now? Right now, word out of Nevada is that Sanders may potentially run away with this in Nevada. Meaning the amount of people that he has been bringing to the polling locations, it has been swelling the polling locations, even in the context of early voting. The last poll that I saw in Nevada had Sanders at 31 with the next competitor at 16. That is an outright skulking. So imagine for the moment that happens, that he gets that massive win out of Nevada. He is going to be running with a head of steam into South Carolina. Now, we haven't even had Nevada yet, and currently, the polling in South Carolina is beginning to turn against Joe Biden, who again, at one point, was 20 to 30 points up. Sanders, 23%. Joe Biden, 23%. Steyer, 20%. Buttigieg, 15%. And the indignity of indignities, Warren, 9%. Now, the fact that Buttigieg is getting 15% in South Carolina is rather shocking to me. And the fact that Warren, who has a larger coalition of people who she brings with her, even though it's massively collapsed. Yes, I mean, she's in single digits, clearly. But she couldn't put together a larger coalition of Buttigieg. That means he is effectively eating her lunch. All of the popularity that Buttigieg got from a pretty decent showing in New Hampshire and eventually a fake win in Iowa has ate into her numbers. I mean, she's had two camps, this kind of white liberal camp, but also the Sanders camp. When she was doing well, she was able to con a lot of Sanders supporters into thinking that she was Bernie Sanders with a vagina. At some point, they started to realize that's not the case. Sanders coalesced his support, meaning liberal class and also the youth vote, the Hispanic vote. He's been able to build a coalition of white, black, gay, straight, Asian, etc., working class. And it's starting to show, even in states like South Carolina. Now keep in mind, Joe Biden's main argument was the electability, and that argument is falling apart. And with that trend breaking, you're starting to see movement, even in places that Joe Biden thought he was safe. 23-23. This is one poll, South Carolina. Here's another one in South Carolina. Joe Biden, 23, Sanders, 21, Steyer, 13%. This is UMass Lowell. Again, I'm showing you more than one because I don't want you to think it's cherry picking one or two polls. I want you to show that there's movement in South Carolina. Meaning right now, we haven't even hit Nevada yet. And whereas Joe Biden in these latest polls is even drawing even or just a few points away, meaning these two are just a few points, the margin of error within these polling. If you hit Nevada with a head full of steam and win it, is Joe Biden going to be able to hold back the night with numbers already like this? Meaning right now, with no momentum bump, he's only keeping Sanders away at 2 in this poll and breaking even in the other poll. And again, this is a state where Biden was ahead by 20 to 30 points. So with a head full of steam coming out of Nevada, does Joe Biden hold South Carolina? My bet is no. My bet is no. If your numbers are this weak now, what is it going to look like if you don't have a good showing in Nevada yourself? Or if Sanders is just so dominant in Nevada that it just overwhelms any other story that tries to come out? This is NBC News Wall Street Journal. Sanders, 27%, unchanged from January. Joe Biden, 15%, down 11. Down 11. Bloomberg, 14%, up 5. Warren, 14%, down 1. Buttigieg, 13%, and Klobuchar, single digits. All right, so one more. This is Survey USA poll. Sanders, 29%, Bloomberg, 18%, Biden, 18%. Now, this poll is consistent with pretty much every other poll that has come out that has effectively showed Sanders in a dominant lead, even in national polling. But there's something else that's relatively unique about this poll, that if this is the way this trend may start, Joe Biden is going to have a hard day coming to South Carolina. So this is among blacks. Sanders, 31%. Joe Biden, 28%. I have never seen this in a poll. Meaning you could see this kind of narrowing and whittling away at Joe Biden's support, especially when the electability argument fell apart. But you're seeing a whittling away at his support structure, even apparently among African Americans. Now again, this is just one, so you keep it in context. But if you start seeing additional polls look like this, South Carolina will be a rout. Now, what I mean by that is, if this poll becomes indicative of a trend, whereas, let's say, after Nevada, you have this notion of electability getting questioned that much more, and the question becomes whether or not Joe Biden is the person to carry that burden. If he's already soft like this now, I would imagine after losing in Nevada, especially if there's a poor showing, that question is going to get that much louder. the fact that there is a poll at all that shows Joe Biden losing support among African Americans to Sanders, that cannot make you feel good if you are Joe Biden and you are expecting South Carolina to be your buffer zone. Hispanic, Sanders, 41%. That is consistent with this typical support of Hispanics around the country. White, Sanders, 24%. He's leading in all demographics, in every group. That's amazing. Meaning he's been able to put together a multiracial coalition of the working class. Like, that's what you're supposed to do. That's called making a winning coalition. Now, from the standpoint, if your name is Biden, in the debate tonight, it will take on greater prominence. You have to make the case to people that you are aware and that the last two elections that you lost miserably are not necessarily indicative of what is going to happen going forward. You need to come up with some kind of story that would allow you to stay in that race. And considering I just saw an article saying that Joe Biden was losing one of his major fundraisers, maybe that's not going to matter. Again, if your name is Biden, your best case scenario is to have an amazing debate tonight. Get out there like on fire. Like you're coherent, you're on it, you're swinging at everybody that's around you, you're just on it, you're on fire. People are like, wow, Joe Biden is the undisputed winner of that. There may be even questions about whether or not you were coked up. That's not going to matter. What's going to matter is that you had an awesome debate performance and you're going to get that Klobuchar bump, just like she got in New Hampshire, going into Nevada. That could assist in him doing something in the bottom meaning movement, because we've seen that the polling or changes based on the debate performance, especially with the debate performance this close to the next election. If your name is Bernie Sanders, you just got to be Bernie Sanders. Continue to have a strong, dominant debate performance. Don't be weak. Do what you do. If your name is Elizabeth Warren, you have the very difficult problem of explaining to people why you are still here. What I mean by that is, when Elizabeth Warren got into this race, she got in with this notion that I want big structural change. I'm the one who's going to make this big structural change, and I'm willing to play within the confines of the Democratic Party to do it. I'm a cuddlier version of Sanders, but I also want these big changes. Well, the problem was the moment that she put out her disingenuous Medicare for All plan that was basically Pete's plan, essentially a public option that she kept calling Medicare for All, she started to drain away support. People realized she wasn't necessarily being serious. And the moment that that veil of authenticity has been pierced, what does it mean for your other policies? How can I trust your big, bold climate plan when your big, bold Medicare for All plan wasn't really big, bold, or Medicare for All? She unraveled, especially for people who are Sanders supporters, who were somewhat cynical of the process. So what happened? The moment that she unraveled, she had to go looking for another coalition. That coalition that she seemed to have tried to lump into is this kind of woke crowd. And oddly enough, the person who supposedly was trying to convince people that she was working in tandem with the left has turned to just attacking Sanders. These kind of weird passive-aggressive attacks. Attacking him, attacking his supporters. Oh, these guys are sexist. Sanders is sexist. Tried to imply that I couldn't necessarily win the race. Nobody believed that particular one, considering he was trying to get her to run in 2015. Nobody would have even known that story had not Warren told somebody that particular story. Meaning, he's never attacked her in this race. But she's only attacked him. And he still refuses to even create contrast in this case. At this point, I suppose you can ask, what does it matter? But I think it does matter in the sense that she has relentlessly, assiduously attacked him. Meaning she has no path to even win a state, let alone the entirety of the primary process. And the person who's supposedly working in tandem with the left has now taken action to run a kamikaze mission to take down the guy that has the best chance of actually winning the race. Her ally, her friend. And it seems the only thing that she could do at this point is throw a punch. She needs to define, why is she here? Now, to me, she's here working as a proxy for the Democratic Party. I've thought that from the beginning. So this behavior to me is not necessarily shocking. It just kind of runs in line with, If your original plan was to stop him by cutting into his numbers, the moment that stops working because you're at 9%, then you just start outright attacking the guy to try to just damage his campaign. That makes sense to me in that sense, if you're running as somebody who's playing spoiler. Her issue is that the contingent that she needs is already consolidated around Sanders. And because she didn't get a bump in Iowa or New Hampshire, in fact, it was the opposite of a bump. Ultimately, because of Buttigieg claiming a fake win, all of the air for all of the other campaigns were effectively sucked out of the room. Media dedicated massive amounts of attention to Buttigieg. It hits New Hampshire. Buttigieg does well in New Hampshire. He gets a massive amount of media attention. That sucks away from Warren's support. And again, Sanders has already consolidated the other part of the base that Warren was trying to get. So again, that sucks away another batch of her support. Hence, 9%. She needs to somehow get across to people her reason for being. Now, the thing is, Bloomberg is in this race. And because Bloomberg is in this race, I think this actually presents her with a pretty decent opportunity. Instead of kind of making this argument that, when you have stuff to clean up, you need a woman for the job, or saying she's going to get a trans kid to choose her department secretary, or screeching that Bernie Sanders is sexist or his supporters are somehow hateful. Instead of doing that nonsense, the thing that she got into the race for, her theory of the case, big structural change, especially in the context of going after Wall Street and the plutocratic oligarchical class. Well, Bloomberg is a perfect foil for her to do that. So this would be somewhat of an interesting dynamic in regards to it allows her an opportunity to tee off in somewhat of an authentic way. Like I said, if Warren could hit a banker in the throat, she'd do it in a heartbeat, especially if she thought she can get away with it. Pete and Klobuchar, I'm sorry, I don't believe that they're a thing. Until they can start get a decent percentage of the African-American, Hispanic, or Asian vote, I don't believe they're a thing. Once they get through a few southern states, if they're still around, we can talk later, but up to this point, I don't buy their candidacy. The interesting catch here is Bloomberg. Bloomberg came into this race, and even though he's going to be on the debate stage tonight, he's not even competing in Nevada, or for that matter, South Carolina. By the same token, he's been able to jump into the race and suck up 14% of the vote share at the expense, of course, of one Joe Biden. Bloomberg is going to have to get across that he can take a punch. There is a mountain of opposition research ready to hit Bloomberg with. And he's going to have to answer for that as opposed to sit back behind the scenes making all of these ads. Sometimes there's a certain degree of non-self-awareness when it comes to these type of people, the plutocratic class. And this debate may actually be a rude awakening for this vanity project, because it's very possible that if it comes across that Bloomberg can't take a punch, that Bloomberg gets flustered, he looks conniving and sneaky, and this thing of him being an oligarch just trying to brazenly buy an election gets across clearly, then he's going to have a trouble maintaining this particular number. Meaning the fact that Bloomberg is on a debate stage is a risk to Bloomberg. I have issues with Tom Perez changing the debate requirements in order to allow somebody like Bloomberg on a debate stage. By the same token, this does entail risk for him. He can now get hit, not just make these ads, and he has a ton of stuff that he needs to answer for. And up to this point, Sanders or none of the other campaigns have been shy, calling him sexist and racist and everything else. So there's that. One thing I do want to mention about Buttigieg, if you remember, back during, I think this was this was last year, later towards the end of last year, Buttigieg has an issue. And you know what that issue is. Buttigieg is radioactive to black people for some reason. Now, in being radioactive, he understands and realizes that no campaign can get out of the primary getting 2% of the black vote. It's a sheer impossibility, especially in the context of the Democratic Party. So he went about trying to rectify this issue. What did he do? He ends up putting out a press release, and he tries to say that, look at all these black people supporting me. You find out that the majority of the people on that list were white. He also added 4 prominent African American names. And again, just as bad as the first part, you find out that all of these people, none of these people were Buttigieg supporters. In fact, one of these people were an out-and-out Sanders supporter. All of them were horrified that Buttigieg would be so dishonest as to put their names in a list when they had no association with his campaign. The media, there was no response to this. Meaning you would think that when he got on the debate stage that this would have been something that the media would have howled about. You'd have thought this would have been something that many of the other campaigns would have said something about. But he got a complete pass on this. Again, flagrant lying. Buttigieg gets caught again. He gets caught again. Now the question becomes, does this get brought up on a debate stage? Now they're trying to say that this was an overstatement. This wasn't an overstatement. This was a lie from a person with a history of just flagrantly lying. Last week, Buttigieg wrote an op-ed in a major South Carolina newspaper saying his campaign was proudly partnered with local businesses, citing Diane's Kitchen in Chester and Atlantis Restaurant in Monarch's Corner. But when ABC News reached out to the entrepreneurs about these new partnerships, they only remembered welcoming Buttigieg's campaign as customers, not forging any sort of partnership with the candidate. I stand for what I stand for, and I didn't say that I had a partnership, Diane Cole, the owner of Diane's Kitchen, told ABC News on Friday, February 14th. After being asked by ABC News about Cole's reaction, the campaign sent a series of messages to Cole trying to persuade her to change her position so it would more closely match the language that Buttigieg used in his op-ed. Now, right off the bat, the moment that the campaign said, we're trying to get him to change the position, you, as a newspaper, should have been able to say, well, this is not really a position. This is something that either happened or didn't happen. Meaning if I put out and say, I have partnered with multiple restaurants in that area, and the restaurant that you're talking to said, that's not true, that didn't happen, as a flat fact and objective reality, that person was saying something that was fundamentally dishonest. Are you telling me that Buttigieg didn't know that he was lying when he said that the woman was partnering with him when they weren't, when there was no partnership? He understood what he was doing. Now the catch here is she's making the point that never happened. I never told him that. So as the newspaper, it's not a situation that Buttigieg tried to get her to change her position. It wasn't a position. It was something that she either did or didn't. Either she partnered with him or she didn't. Or she didn't. She's saying she didn't. The fact that Buttigieg was trying to go after her to get her to say, okay, I'll partner with you, doesn't do anything to the fact that he lied about the fact that the partnership existed at all. I hope you understand what I mean. You're giving him a very kind eye for something that was just flagrant dishonesty. It's flagrant dishonesty. And again, the question becomes, will there be a consequence for this? Will there be a consequence? I got to be honest, I'm doubtful. I mean, it seems like that Pete can flagrantly lie about stuff like this, and it doesn't seem like there's a backlash. I mean, the guy claimed that he had won the Iowa caucus. He didn't win anything, and they still allow him to run with it as if he did. Some of the stuff has to do with their hatred of Sanders, fair enough, but there should be some accountability for some of this stuff, and it doesn't seem like they hold Pete accountable at all. They're still trying to make Pete Buttigieg a thing with 2% of the black vote. I find that to be outright amazing. Oh, by the way, speaking of Iowa, so, they've been doing a recanvass in Iowa. Now, in the recanvass, Sanders, you're going to like this. Buttigieg now leads Sanders by 0.08 state delegate equivalents, according to results posted by the state party, 26.186% for Buttigieg to 26.182% for Sanders. The initial results were marred by apparent reporting or mathematical errors or malfeasance. I'm always amazed that they just immediately go to the notion of incompetence as if the context of 2016 doesn't exist. It exists. We were there. We could see that they were doing everything in their power to shirk the guy, to undermine the guy. So why am I going to look at this process where, based on this, every advantage in the world, meaning every advantage that took place in that Iowa caucus, guess where it went? To Pete. It wasn't just the errors that was taking place that they were giving to Pete. It wasn't just the dodging coin tosses that they were giving to Pete. It wasn't just that nonsense. It was also the way they dripped out results when there were no results. Meaning they had the capacity to go through and put out who won. They didn't do that. They dropped results all throughout the week to give the appearance that Pete Buttigieg was ahead of something that he was not ahead of. Even under their best of guidelines, he still lost by thousands of votes. And now it looks like he's not even going to win by the metric that they selectively chose for him to win by. Sanders' campaign said it will seek a recount. The Buttigieg and Sanders campaign have 24 hours to formally request one, where Sanders is going to seek a recount. He's trying to get every delegate he can get his hands on. We now believe a recount will give Senator Sanders enough delegates equivalents to put him over the top by that metric as well. We want to thank the people of Iowa, our supporters, our volunteers, and everyone who made this possible, Sanders Senior Advisor Jeff Weaver said in a statement. Look, it is heartening to me that he is fighting for each and every delegate he can get his hands on. Good. His supporters should see him doing that. That shouldn't necessarily be something that comes across as, especially after 2016. Within the context of 2016, the last thing you want is people being disenchanted with the process because they think, oh, he's going to be cheated anyway. I do think he's going to be cheated anyway. But that gives that much more oomph to the campaign to go after each and every delegate and to ensure that they're not being fucked over, at the very least to the degree that they can ensure it. And even then, I would make the argument that you will have to blow them out to win. It's not enough to be around the edges. You have to blow them out to win. Here's an interesting story on Bloomberg, by the way, while we're talking about it. So, this story came out in the New York Times. You're going to like this. Neer Tanden, Center for American Progress. And the most oblivious man on the planet, the guy who's actually going to be hosting this debate, Chuck Todd, the guy who said Sanders supporters are brown shirts, and even go further into making this case about he can't understand why Sanders is in the lead. Sanders is in a double-digit lead. He's been leading for the past several months. He's been surging for the past several months. If you don't see that, Chuck, why do you have your job? And maybe you can make the case that Chuck has that job for the very specific reason that he is able to say he does not see shit like that. So they're going into this notion of the chilling effect of Bloomberg's money on the political space. Over the past several years, Bloomberg has spent billions, with a B, essentially paying off these various charities and organizations, especially in the context of the Democratic Party. He has been able to lock down the machinery of the Democratic Party with his money. And you can make a case that it's not even that massive of an investment, considering how much he will have to pay if Sanders, or for that matter, even Warren, got in office. What's $3 billion if you're going to end up paying $6 billion if this guy who looks like he's about to run away with it runs away with it? So their argument has to do with the point that they're trying to make is Center for American Progress. Center for American Progress had a financial relationship with Mike Bloomberg. They were effectively getting a ton of cash from Bloomberg. Again, Bloomberg dealing with Democratic priorities. So, right here, this is New York Times, and I'm brief part, but I'm going to show you how pathetic Chuck Todd is. How pathetic Chuck Todd is. The chilling effect was apparent in 2015 to researchers at the Center for American Progress, a liberal policy group, when they turned in a report on anti-Muslim bias in the United States. Their draft included a chapter of more than 4,000 words about New York City's police surveillance of Muslim communities. Mr. Bloomberg was mentioned by name 8 times in the chapter, which was reviewed by the Times. When the report was published a few weeks later, the chapter was gone. So was mention of Bloomberg's name. Yasmin Tayeb, author of the report, said in an interview that the authors have been instructed to make drastic revisions or remove the chapter and opted to do the latter rather than whitewash the NYPD's wrongdoing. She said she found it disconcerting to be asked to remove a chapter because of how it's going to be perceived by Mayor Bloomberg. At least one senior staff wrote at the time that there will be a strong reaction from Bloomberg's world if we release the report as written. According to the email reviewed by the Times, and 3 people with direct knowledge of the situation said Mr. Bloomberg was a factor. Alienating him might not have been a cost-free proposition. When the report came out, he had already given the organization 3 grants worth nearly $1.5 million. And in 2017, he contributed $400,000 more. Now, you've just found out, based on what the New York Times has reported, that Bloomberg had effectively given so much cash to Center for American Progress that they were overly concerned because of the fiduciary relationship that they had with Bloomberg, that they didn't want to run a story showing gross and rampant Islamophobia by the New York Police Department. And yeah, by Bloomberg, who was head of that police department. New York Times, no bullshit. Sources and everything else. So when Mr. Oblivious, Chuck Todd, gets the opportunity to talk to Neera Tanden, what do you think Chuck Todd says? Do you think Chuck Todd asked Neera Tanden about this? I mean, this is a big deal, right? We're seeing an oligarch, for all intents and purposes, have so much money spread out through the political process that they are scared to either not support him, not endorse him, or they endorse him enthusiastically because they know a bunch of money is going to end up their way or to their organizations, or in a sense of organizations that have fiduciary relationships with him, which allows control by Bloomberg because they don't want to lose those fiduciary relationships. You're sitting across from somebody who's the head of that organization. If your name is Chuck Todd and you're even pretending to be a journalist on television, don't you ask that question and tell me, do you think Chuck Todd asked that question? There's something else I want you to see here. For somebody might give Chuck Todd the benefit of the doubt and say, well, Chuck Todd didn't read that paper. Listen to the way Chuck Todd asked this question. Chuck Todd wants to ask the question, but something in him, either, he's scared of Neera Tanden, either he doesn't necessarily want to hit Bloomberg on it, whatever the reason is, he cannot dredge up enough journalistic integrity and instincts to ask her a question that is screaming at the height of its lungs to be asked. Chuck Todd failing miserably at his job.
Neera, very quick, how much will some Democrats feel hesitant to go after Bloomberg because he is such an important donor?
No, I don't think so. I think people
You
will
don't think
be
so?
And just to make one more point about Bloomberg's influence, the New York Times piece also talks about Emily's List. Now, Emily's List is an organization specific to women. We care about women's issues. That's what we're here for. That's our wheelhouse. We're not pretending to do this other stuff. Women's issues, right here. Buck stops here. By the same token, they were going to do a hit video on Sanders, calling him anti-woman, while Bloomberg is in the race. Again, somebody else with a fiduciary relationship with Bloomberg, who has a litany of sexual abuse allegations that is longer than Trump's. Think about what we're saying here. The organization that is supposed to represent women, hear us roar, Emily's List, gets the opportunity to make a hit video, and the person they choose to make the hit video on is Sanders, as opposed to the apex predator, pervert, Bloomberg. Mind-blowing. So when Chuck Todd asked her that, hey, you don't think these groups are going to be concerned about hitting Bloomberg? Well, the New York Times article makes it very clear that, yes, it does create a chill effect because of the amount of money that he splurges. He spent billions greasing the pockets of these people. So when they make that case, that means Chuck Todd read the article. Chuck Todd knows. Chuck Todd, as a flat fact, meaning he knows everything that I've just told you about that was in this article. And yet he could not dredge up the journalistic integrity to just answer the question outright. The New York Times reported that Center for American Progress killed multiple stories concerning Bloomberg because of the fiduciary relationship that you guys had. Do you have anything to say about that? That's pretty bad, especially from the standpoint of journalistic integrity. There's your question, right there. Right there. Why couldn't you ask her that? And the way you ask this question does get across that at the very least you are aware of this article. You just didn't go there. Let's start it from scratch. Let's hear Chuck.
Democrats feel hesitant to go after Bloomberg because he is such an important donor?
No, I don't think so. I think people
You
will
don't think
be
so?
as
You
critical.
don't think some interest groups? I mean, does he have an endorsement from anybody that he hasn't given money to?
I mean, I can't speak to his endorsement, but he's going to have to defend his record as much as anyone else in this race. And I do think that there's been plenty of criticism over the last couple of days, couple of weeks, and I expect you'll see a fair amount of that.
Now that's sad. That's sad. That is massively sad. Unless
I think tomorrow is.
Unless Chuck Todd just disagrees with the reporting of the New York Times, which at this point I have no idea why he would. Everything that's reported is infinitely logical in regards to this kind of relationship between cash and organizations that need that cash and is willing to burn their integrity in order to get that cash. Well, here's a person sitting across from me right here. The reporting is out. It's very clear. Her organization killed a story because of the relationship that her organization had with Bloomberg. Chuck Todd, not even able to dredge up a morsel of journalistic integrity, cannot bring himself to just directly ask the question.
It's a very big day for him to show that
We're going to find out.
he can throw a punch too.
He is such an important donor.
No, I don't think so. I think people
You
will
don't think
be
so?
as
You
critical.
don't think some interest groups? I mean, does he have an endorsement from anybody that he hasn't given money to?
I mean, I can't speak to his.
Why are you asking her the question that way? Like, it's as if he expected her to just honestly say, yes, that cash does have an effect. He follows up with this weak way of asking the question of like, really? You don't think some of these interest groups will, have issues with attacking him? Again, ask the question directly. The way you ask the question is to point it directly. And you're asking her that question directly, not because you're picking on her, but entirely because the reporting for the New York Times gets across that multiple organizations are being influenced in the exact way that you are insinuating, but for whatever reason, you wouldn't just outright say. I guarantee you this, though. If this question was pointed at Sanders, he would be out here screaming brown shirts at the height of his lungs. That's journalistic malpractice. That's journalistic malpractice. It's amazing. Chuck Todd cannot bring himself to just ask that basic question. It's a goddamn shame. Rob R. JT, you were right. Elizabeth Warren said in Washington Post her expectations was to take what Bernie Sanders built, get the fuck out of here. Bernie Sanders built it. Bloom wrote it saying everyone drop out. Oh, right. Bloomberg said everybody drop out. He is running scared. Well, yeah, his concern is that they split the vote, but he should have known that the moment that he got into the race. What did he think was going to happen? Did he honestly believe that Joe Biden was going to immediately leave the race because Bloomberg jumped into the race? No, that wasn't going to happen at all. Every state that Joe Biden and Bloomberg are in are just going to split the vote. There is nobody in their right mind that is going to be voting for Sanders and then jump on Bloomberg's bandwagon. You may have people who jump from Biden to Bloomberg, but you also may have a lot of people that jump from Bloomberg or from Biden to Sanders. Like, it's not entirely along these ideological lines. People don't entirely always look at politics that way. That's kind of just the way the hardcore politics addicts look at it. But yeah, she just tried to take what he built. I mean, you can look at the way she was running her campaign. This is kind of my point. This wasn't a mystery per se. If the person is in the race and they're taking a tact to pretend to be somebody else, you have to ask why. Why are you pretending to be this other person? And then you take the secondary tract of, is it possible that, yeah, she may be running as for herself, but also as a proxy in some degree for the party itself, in order to stop what the party considers to be an existential threat to their, well, that's the whole point of existential threat, right? Vaquero Supreme, plastic premature repeat, a creature in a vat grown, a creature vat grown through the process of precision fermentation in a permanent state lab facility. Jesus Christ. Pete Buttigieg, I don't believe he's a thing. Honestly, I swear to God, I don't. I'm always amazed at the way he can lie and get away with it. I'm always amazed that nobody called him on that particular issue. If Bernie Sanders did that, their hair would be on fire. Their hair would be on fire. And while we're talking about these two, right here, Michael Williams. Say the DNC fails at cheating Sanders this time, something they are accustomed to, failing, and Bernie does win the nomination. If through pressure he picks Pete Buttigieg as a running mate, does he still get my vote? No, he doesn't get my vote. Because I hate questions like this, but my reasoning boils down to, if you're being bent to form to choose somebody like Pete Buttigieg, something is going magnificently wrong. Something is going horribly wrong. Let me see. Jamarl, can you comment on the anti-Bernie support segment CNN did this afternoon? It's also, yeah, I've done a few of those videos making the point of these guys are attacking his supporters. How weird is that? Like, they've tried everything else. They've thrown the entirety of the kitchen sink and everything else in Sanders as double-digit lead in the polls. He is dominant in the early states, and he could possibly run away with this. We need to just run the table. And that's with everything they've thrown at him. And that's including the man having a heart attack. And so now they've ended up in this weird position of attacking his supporters, which again is not directly attacking him, attacking his heart attack, which again, yeah, I guess that's attacking him, but that's such a weird way of going after somebody. I suppose they look at this and say the other attacks haven't necessarily worked. They've only made him stronger. And so now they've come to this particular situation where that's what they've decided to double down on. Fortunately for Sanders, and tonight, this is going to become an issue. Sanders has started to, at the very least, respond and answer that Bernie bro nonsense with a certain degree of strength. Let's be clear. Let's be clear. There's nothing unique about Sanders supporters in the sense of saying bad things about each other online. There's a Warren supporter that's out here attacking a woman who was a cancer survivor. So, let's be very clear. All of this has to do with the cynical ploy of trying to undermine one of the things that Sanders, his strong suit, meaning his support, the level of enthusiasm that people have when they are pushing for him. They either want to tarnish it or, for the most part, get him to somehow distance himself from that. Well, he's finally hit upon the right answer, telling those people to kick rocks. All of these groups are individual actors. These are not the same things as surrogates or anything to that effect. He doesn't have control over the millions of people, and choosing a few random tweets is just pathetic. Sorry, it's just pathetic. Sanders, at the town hall last night, answers this very specific Bernie bro thing. And, I tend to always yell saying, don't be weak, because there's not going to be something that helps you. If anything, it's going to be something that they chase you with. Meaning the moment that you apologize for something that you shouldn't be apologizing for, the moment that you allow people who have no credibility in this, who are entirely doing this for cynical reasons, for cynical political reasons, this kind of phony tone policing, fake outrage. The moment that you allow those people to get some kind of political concession from you for something that's not real, you've injured yourself in that process. You should not accept a framing of the world that is not legitimate, especially when you know those people are putting that stuff out there entirely, hypocritical in one sense, but entirely just for politics. Michael Bloomberg, sexist, racist, misogynistic Michael Bloomberg, that made the argument that people who get of age and get ill should just die and shouldn't get medical care. The guy who threw hundreds of thousands of people of a particular racial persuasion up against the wall in order to shake down. The overwhelming majority were innocent, and it just so happened the overwhelming majority, like 80 or 90%, were either black or Hispanic. What do you think is more damaging? The vulgarity that comes out of Bloomberg's mouth, telling people that they should kill their baby because that person just so happened to get pregnant, working for the ninth richest man on the planet. Or going further, just go get a black to take care of your kid. The kid doesn't know any better. I mean, some of the vulgar things that he said at the places where he worked, and then he has these non-disclosure agreements where he, for the most part, can abuse these women and then try to hide behind a non-disclosure agreement. That's Bloomberg, the person and the group that Emily's list, for whatever reason, found acceptable. What's more important? Supporters that are righteous, with a certain degree of righteous indignation, agitate and push for their particular candidate, or a vulgar, racist, misogynistic plutocrat that is effectively just trying to buy an election. The richest man on the goddamn planet, the ninth richest man on the goddamn planet, with an entire media apparatus, bought the entire Democratic apparatus, and is complaining. Oh, those poor masses are complaining on Twitter and Facebook. Get real. Get real. But Joe Biden is doing this also. Again, this is the guy that's been lying about civil rights, lying about his record on Social Security, lying about the Iraq War vote, a guy who has been lying flagrantly about his record. And if you have to lie that much about the things that you've supported over the course of time, well, there's a problem with that. It's even that much more ludicrous when you can literally show the tape. You can run the video with Joe Biden and his original position, and then later on essentially repudiating the original position, trying to convince people that that wasn't, in fact, his original position. And of course, Warren, who's also lumped into this now. They will hit him with this tonight, or at the very least, they will try. And if Sanders was still chasing his tail, backpedaling and accepting this narrative and framing of the world going into this debate, that would have made that attack that much more significant to be able to hit him with it. Because again, at that point, he would have been accepting that framing of the world. This is the Jeremy Corbyn stuff. They keep calling him anti-Semitic, and he's essentially apologizing for something that he shouldn't be apologizing for. Well, finally, Sanders has sort of put a right answer and has stopped accepting their framing of the world.
But let me just say this. Talk to the people in my campaign, often the African American women in this campaign. Talk to my wife about the kind of ugly attacks that have come into us. So right now, which is a very serious national problem, we have an internet which is essentially the Wild West. Somebody could say, hey, I'm Anderson Cooper, and Zippo say some ugly things. And right now that cannot be stopped. All right? So yes, I want to have this campaign focus on the important issues facing the American people. I've just said a moment ago, as I've said many times, I'm going to support, if I don't win this thing, I'm going to support somebody else who wins it. All right, and I don't want to see terrible personal attacks. We can disagree on the issues, not personal attacks, but that is not just my campaign. We got millions of supporters out there. We've got millions and millions of supporters, and I dare say 99.9% are people who would never, ever do that.
And, you know, to make this point that much more clear, because this is outright ludicrous the more that you think about it. You had people on video on MSNBC saying Bernie Sanders makes her skin crawl. You have another person saying Bernie Sanders is anti-woman. You have somebody else who said that even supporting Sanders with Elizabeth Warren in the race is sexist, effectively saying that people who support Sanders and who could dramatically tell the difference between Sanders and Warren, that those people are sexist, supposedly because her plans are more liked, her plan in more detail, and she is more trusted. Now, none of this is true at this point. None. It wasn't true back then, but definitely not true now. You've had an entire media apparatus on CNN and MSNBC that has outright attacked him relentlessly. And they're bitching about his supporters on Twitter and social media. You better get the fuck out of here. Get out of here. I mean, to put it in perspective, they are complaining about Facebook and Twitter. They're complaining about his supporters online, this large working class contingent, black, white, gay, straight, men, women, across the board, a multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition of workers. The people who have the least amount of power in this particular society, as opposed to the big media networks like CNN, the people like Chuck Todd's of the world, the Brian Williams of the world, attacking him. I mean, think about the questions they were asking him. Hey, Bernie, the Ayatollah wants to get us out of Syria or the Middle East. You want to get us out the Middle East too, right? I mean, it's this type of nonsense where the framing and everything else in the way that they push the conversation goes against his interests. And with mainstream media networks dramatically going against Sanders on this front, now they're going to bitch and moan and complain about his supporters, especially now in the context of those supporters carrying him a large part of the way. You have zero credibility to make this point, and I'm not going to take a lesson from anybody in mainstream media with the nonsense that they've been pushing for the entirety of this campaign.
Why he's running now.
They need to start knocking some candidates out. Otherwise, the Democratic Party is going to nominate Bernie Sanders.
For the Democrats to win, they have to knock Bernie out early.
If it's clear that you are not going to be the nominee.
Now, this is some other nonsense that they like to ask Sanders. If it's clear you're not going to be the nominee, are you going to back the next candidate? Well, they never asked the other campaigns that.
Will you leave the race?
I intend to be the nominee.
Bernie Sanders is the most stubborn politician. Stubborn old goat.
Who's yelling, screaming, screaming.
In the same screechy voice. His time has come and passed.
Coming out of Iowa, I would bet on Biden being there.
Harris, Warren,
Kamala,
Cory Booker, Michael Bennet. I think there's a lot of pressure on Bernie.
It doesn't appear that there's growth.
Should he be thinking about throwing in the towel? Your polling numbers have gone down a little bit.
Just happened to bring it with me.
Incredible.
is Bernie done?
Bernie Sanders was just released from the hospital.
We shouldn't expect to see him on the campaign trail in the foreseeable future.
To put it bluntly, I am back.
It's called the AOC primary.
Biggest endorsement of the 2020 race.
She formally endorsed Sanders in dramatic fashion.
Endorsements can be overplayed.
I just want to kind of say, duh.
I just don't see that he's back. You're disheveled, you're unlikable.
Well, guess what? He's in second place nationally.
He's more lighthearted.
Donald Trump losing badly, because that's baloney. You're smoking something.
The only one I didn't want to.
Things are going very, very well for Bernie Sanders.
34.5 million.
25 million in the last month.
With 6 days to go, some are sounding the alarm.
Bernie Sanders wins New Hampshire. This comes after Sanders won the popular vote in Iowa.
I am scared to death.
The freak out you will see. Progressives want to march the aristocrats to the guillotine.
There's real panic.
There's panic.
It's going to be the end of days.
There were executions in Central Parks. I'm not happy. You're going to be a miserable president, and I might have been one of the ones getting executed. Bernie, you're full of it.
Who's the front runner?
Pete Buttigieg upset Bernie Sanders in both states.
The story is how much ground.
Think about what Pete Buttigieg upset Sanders in both states by losing to Sanders. Mind-blowing, the stuff that they've been doing. Now, if you're a supporter of Sanders and you sat through video after video, day after day after day with them putting this nonsense out, how do you take that? I mean, you had Harvey Weinstein in the last election shilling for Hillary Clinton. Yes, apex pervert, woman sexual abuser, Harvey Weinstein, out there shilling for Hillary Clinton, saying Bernie Sanders was sexist. I guess my point is, it is a good thing. It is a crucial positive that he has those supporters out there that have agitated, pushed, bitched, and moaned that much in order to keep him in this thing, to put that particular media out, to get that particular message out. Because left up to mainstream media, and the reason that they're going after his supporters like this, because they, to some degree, understand that everything that they've thrown at him, despite the fact that they've been outright vitriolic towards him and his campaign, and at this point, even his supporters, that it hasn't dented him. If anything, he's only gotten stronger. I mean, when you have a situation where they're saying Bernie Sanders makes my skin crawl, and then it's like, oh yeah, but his supporters are the problem. His supporters are the problem. And by the way, this is always on MSNBC. Like if you notice, many of the clips that you were seeing there were on MSNBC.
Today,
take a look at this. This is MSNBC. This perfectly makes my point. There was no pushback on this. This was just accepted as par for the course.
Considered a somewhat moderate Democrat. Bernie Sanders makes my skin crawl, and I can't even identify for you what exactly it is, but I see him as sort of a not pro-woman candidate. And so having the two of them there, like I don't understand young women who support him, and I'm hoping that having him next to her will help highlight that, because those are the people that if I were her, I would want to say, well, why are you supporting him and not me if you're going to choose between the two of us? So in 19...
That's amazing. There's no pushback on that. That's just par for the course for MSNBC. You have people like Steve Schmidt on the channel. You have all of these people who, for the most part, have been outright, again, vitriolic towards him and his supporters. And you can understand to some degree why these people of a particular class, Bloomberg and people like Bloomberg, sees that their interests especially from the standpoint of the ad revenue and the dollars that they're dumping into the campaign, not to mention the lowering of taxes. Meaning people like Bloomberg or Obama or Clinton or Hillary, for the most part, keeps the system the way the system is, the system that allowed them to take some level of advantage. And now you have this socialist that's in the race with his unruly supporters backing that socialist up. And they don't know how to deal with it. So they've relegated themselves to just attacking his supporters. I'm sorry, that's weak. And fortunately, hopefully, Sanders maintains the strong response to that of kick rocks. How important is it to talk about what Trump and neoliberal Democrats really are? Fascists and fascist enablers. Jill Clausen. So this gets into kind of the exact definition of fascism, or the Mussolini definition of fascism, this notion of corporate America fusing together with this kind of government apparatus of sorts. The Republican Party clearly meets that, I would say, that threshold. I mean, they tend to be, right-wingers tend to be authoritarian just in general, trend that way. And yeah, Bloomberg definitely fits that particular description. But also, think about what Warren has been saying in this race. I mean, she's been talking about putting her competitor in court, meaning this is after Mueller investigation, after Ukraine Gate and the impeachment hearing. She's talking about another hearing if she wins office to create this kind of kangaroo system where she was going to put her opposition in prison. And again, this is not a situation like going after George Bush where there's been no trial. This is going after somebody who's been tried at this point twice. Going after quote-unquote disinformation. Again, this is a woman who called herself a Native American for years, who have lied flagrantly within the context of this campaign and has ran a flagrantly disingenuous campaign. And she's now talking about, I'm going to go after people and criminalize quote-unquote disinformation. Think about what that means. Effectively, fuck the First Amendment. And what are they going to call disinformation? When Trump said he's stealing or he's protecting the oil in Syria, if I make the argument, no, he's actually stealing the oil, is that disinformation? When you have the UN reports come out, the leaks showing that the chemical weapons strike that was supposedly had taken place didn't take place, and that they were being pressured, meaning the weapons inspectors, to essentially point the finger at Assad. If I make that point and mainstream media ignores that story, is that disinformation? What about making the point about Bolivia and the lithium reserves and the OAS and the penchant for the OAS to work as a tool for American power? I hope you get my point. What is Elizabeth Warren going to discern or decide to be disinformation? And is it basically going to boil down to stories that are against her and her party's interests? And do you trust her to be the arbiter of truth? I do not. I do not. I don't at all. I hope you get my point. The notion that he has to condemn his supporters is ludicrous. And this is somewhat of a sad, pathetic argument. And if this is the best that they got, and your name is Bernie Sanders, you should be feeling pretty good right about now. Just saying. Who's here? Let's see. Julian Castro, male dads for Bernie. Reopen 9/11, inside job. Nas, right? Barbara Marissa, whoa, Bernie bros are the intolerant bunch. You know the funny thing about it, Bob? There's a Warren supporter that's been attacking a cancer patient, like a cancer survivor. There's been other ones attacking, like Nina Turner, saying the most disgusting things to the other supporters. I guess my point is, this is not a unique phenomenon of Sanders. Ultimately, basically, this is just the nature of the web. And if you're looking me in the face and telling me that you're the person who could beat Trump, and you're whining and bitching and complaining, oh, his supporters are saying bad things about me, they're calling me a snake, then you're not the person to beat Trump. And in fact, you should get out the race. Just saying. Just saying. All right, so Joe Biden makes a hit video. Michael Bloomberg. Now, again, this kind of goes to my point in saying that these guys are going after the Bloomberg campaign. And I strongly suspect that in this debate, you're going to see that. Meaning, I don't think this is going to be a situation where, look, I think Sanders is going to have a target on his back, clearly. But I also think Bloomberg is going to have a target on his back also. I really have a hard time believing that the campaigns are perfectly okay with Bloomberg dropping $400 million in the race, dwarfing all the other campaigns, and being so full of hubris to effectively tell everybody else, get out the race. Get out the race. The longer you stay in the race, the harder it's going to be for me to take down Sanders. It's like, are you serious? The stones to make that argument. So whether it's Biden, whether it's Warren, whether it's Klobuchar, all of them, to some degree, are going to be aiming at Bloomberg. The question is, do they get questions that allow them to do that? Again, I would say it's a journalistic malpractice to not allow questions like that when the guy's trying to buy the race, but this is Chuck Todd we're talking about. So there's, I can make a strong case that Chuck Todd keeps his job because he's oblivious. That's not a bug. That's somewhat of a feature. Listen to the candidates go after Bloomberg. Because again, Bloomberg has a lot of issues. I mean, those policies have been outright racist and sexist and vulgar. Meaning he is going to have to stand up and he's going to have to account for those with a lot of people on that stage that greatly dislike him and probably don't believe he deserves to be on that stage at all. They are going to be trying to get their pint of blood. Now, the reason I say this is that much more important, meaning they may go after him more than Sanders, only because Bloomberg has subsumed their particular role in this race. Yes, they hate Sanders, but the people who, or the person who is eating into their numbers is Bloomberg. The person who's swallowing up all the attention, the person who's telling them to get out the race is Bloomberg. So it'd be interesting to see the dynamic with Bloomberg in this race and whether or not he could take a punch. But let's hear the candidates go after Bloomberg.
A lot of advertising, but it can't erase your record. There's a lot to talk about, Michael Bloomberg. You all are going to start focusing on him like you have on me, which I'm not complaining.
What kind of ally would you have called Michael Bloomberg for the Obama administration?
On several issues like guns.
Now, this one is an interesting question because Bloomberg was not a fan of Obama, and yet Bloomberg has been running out advertisements as if Obama and Bloomberg were like arm in arm. Like if you didn't know any better, you would have thought Bloomberg was endorsed by Obama. Just those are the type of ads that they've been running. So you would imagine for Joe Biden, who hasn't got Obama's endorsement, who would kill for Obama's endorsement, who was told, or at the very least his campaign was told, don't let Joe Biden embarrass himself, which gives a certain idea on what Obama was thinking of Joe Biden. To have Bloomberg running around screaming that he's supposedly have this close association with Obama, it would probably burn. Now, Joe Biden, you would think, could dredge up a little bit more energy to make that case. But again, this is kind of the problem with Biden. It's like he's a walking corpse. There's no fire. There's no energy. It's almost he's in it like it's a job requirement as opposed to having something that he really burned down deep want. And maybe he just doesn't have it in him anymore to make this case. But nevertheless, his wife, who apparently doesn't love him because she keeps putting him out there like this, he's still going after Bloomberg.
He was a real ally. He was a real ally. But if you notice, he wouldn't even endorse Barack in 2008. He wouldn't endorse him. He endorsed Bush. He endorsed, the Republicans before that. He all of a sudden, he's his best buddy. And he would not endorse him. You take a look at the stop and frisk proposals. You take a look at his ideas on redlining he's talking about. You take a look at what he's done relative to the African-American community.
Like I have come on your show multiple times, and a number of other candidates have come on and answered tough questions. He's got to do the same thing. He hasn't gone on the Sunday show since he announced. Instead, he's just running ads. And I don't think you should be able to hide behind the ads. I think you should not only go on these shows, I also think that he should take the debate stage. That's why I have actually been supportive of him on that debate stage, because I know I can't beat him on the airwaves, but I can beat him on the debate stage.
Let me ask. The part I object to is the billionaire being able to reach in his own pocket and throw down, a couple of $100 million in order to finance their campaign. Because what that does is that just short circuits all of democracy.
Regardless of how much money a multi-billionaire candidate is willing to spend on his election, we will not create the energy and excitement we need to defeat Donald Trump if that candidate pursued, advocated for, and enacted racist policies like stop and frisk, which cause communities of color in his city to live in fear.
Okay,
So you could say to some degree, they're telegraphing what is going to take place in regards to the way they're going to go after Bloomberg. And I don't think Sanders has these fond, cuddly feelings for Bloomberg in the way that he can kind of justify that stuff to Biden. I think this is a socialist getting the opportunity to get on the debate stage with an oligarch. And some of these other restraints that he may have, racist, sexist, all that stuff where he would never, ever use against somebody like Joe Biden are fair game against somebody like Bloomberg. So this debate is coming up, 40 minutes? It should be extremely interesting, and that's to put it mildly. And again, that depends on whether or not these campaigns go after him. I have a strong suspicion that one of the questions that are going to come up about is going to be about buying the election. It has to be. Now, again, it doesn't have to be. I'm saying if there's any level of journalistic integrity, if there's a morsel, if there's just a crumb somewhere, then that question of an oligarch buying his way into the race has to come up. In which case, I suspect each and every one of these campaigns is going to tee off on that very specific point. And it's a hard argument to make to me that the American public is perfectly okay with somebody who, for the most part, is just buying the election. I don't buy that. I'm not that cynical of the process. Owen Johnson, Julian Casablanca's male dad, not Castro. Response, Warren, stop being such a hater, Jamarl. Welcome Mal and Mokahan in her moccasins and have a powwow chow with her. All right, so powwow chow is the stuff that Warren gave. That was the recipe that she gave, that she effectively, she took that from somewhere. But it was in a Native American cookbook. Can't make that up. Cannot make that up. That is so sad. But yes. Yeah. All right, so the debate is about to come up pretty soon, and I am debating on whether or not I'm going to cover the debate. So Joe Biden, there is still a politician in Joe Biden. And again, like I said, I think Joe Biden has a hard way to go from here. However, if he does extremely well tonight, he may be able to get a bump that allows him to get some level of something going into South Carolina. By the same token, he has not done well in these debates. And because he has not done well in these debates, there's no reason to believe that he's going to do awesome in this particular one. I don't think he has what he needs in order to kind of pull the performance, pull off what he would need to pull off in order to have a good showing here. I'm just doubtful. Doesn't mean it's not impossible. I'm just doubtful. It's also possible that with that bump, he does something in Nevada. Now, the thing here is, though, if he does not do anything in Nevada, if he does not get the bump he needs in this particular poll, and if he hits South Carolina and loses South Carolina, Joe Biden is probably going to fold up shop pretty quickly. I have a hard time understanding why he would even be in the race after that. If he loses a state that he was winning by like 30 points, and his main claim to fame is, I'm getting the black vote, and you lose that state, what is your argument for being in the race? Now, this will warm Bloomberg's heart, I suppose, because he wants Biden out the race as soon as possible. But Biden is not going into that good night yet. And he has a few, at the very least, couple of weeks before he's going anywhere. This is a hit video that apparently Biden's camp put out on Bloomberg. Keep in mind, Bloomberg has been paying, like $150 for people to say nice things about him. And so apparently they are taking advantage of that.
Passed a health care bill that does absolutely nothing to fix the big health care problems in this country. It is just a disgrace. I would argue that today we are more segregated in America, certainly, than we were in terms of race, than we were a dozen years ago. Why, during the Obama administration, didn't we pull together? Well, I asked the president. That's his job, really, to pull people together.
Obama did basically nothing. That administration did almost nothing.
You say that you're a big fan of Donald Trump.
I friend of Donald Trump's. He's a New York icon.
You've actually been quite...
Oh, that is a great ad. That is a great ad. Oh man, that is a great ad. That is a goddamn great ad. I love those ads. Look, the reason why when I think about Joe Biden and I talk about going after Biden, I use this notion of contrast. This is what he said, meaning this is the lie, this is the truth. And not do it in a bullshit way, in an authentic way where you could show that the person is not telling the truth. They're being dishonest. Exposing the fact that somebody is being dishonest for some reason has that much more of an oomph to it than an attack that is somewhat disingenuous. Fact of the matter is Bloomberg has just been running a bunch of ads without necessarily allowing or having a situation where he's taking incoming fire. He's going to be on the debate stage. You saw that particular ad where Joe Biden just went down the line and making a point of Bloomberg said this, but this is what Bloomberg actually said when he had the opportunity to speak about it. Meaning none of this evolution because he wants to run for president. This is the reality versus this is the lie. And to just go down the list on one item after the next, after the next, after the next. And again, it's that much more effective because Bloomberg has been running videos where he is supposedly arm in arm with Obama on this host of policies. Joe Biden, the defender of Obama's legacy in this case, that wasn't going to go down well with Biden. So look, I don't know how much cash Joe Biden has to put that ad out. I don't know how much oomph he can, get from that particular ad or the number of people who's going to see the ad, but it's a pretty effective ad. So yeah, good job. Good job. There is still something in there. Those dull eyes, there's still a light back there. Kicks on every so often. There's still a light back there. All right. And I think I'll do the Assange one as a separate item. And let's see, I did that one. Now this one is more funny than anything else. The Never Trumpers. The Never Trumpers. Meaning the Democratic Party has gotten into such a weird spot that many of these liberals, for the most part, are willing to accept Bloomberg. Bloomberg is utterly atrocious. Effectively, they're going to give up one chauvinistic, racist billionaire for another misogynistic, racist Republican billionaire. I find this to be utterly amazing. Now, to be fair, Bloomberg doesn't necessarily challenge anything associated with these people. All of these people are rich beyond any notion that we would, for the most part, grasp. So their life and the things that they require in the context of their life, especially from the standpoint of materialistic needs, are met. So right off the bat, we have a difference in class that creates maybe a difference in point of view. Meaning they can lavish all of this attention on Donald Trump because he hurts their sensibilities. But there is something to be real to be said about putting somebody like Bloomberg, who's effectively a Republican, in that spot because you want to get rid of the other Republican. What does it mean for the Democratic Party if somebody like Bloomberg could take that spot? And understand, all of these people want to scream that Sanders is not a Democrat. Sanders is not a Democrat. Nonsense. People, believe it or not, thought that the Democratic Party represented the things that Sanders was espousing anyway. Understand what I mean? For the longest time, the Democratic Party has been talking as if they were Sanders. I mean, the hope and change rhetoric that Obama was putting out. It had this euphoric cosmopolitanism associated with it. And in reality, they weren't those things. For the longest time, many of the people in the Democratic Party thought that the things that Sanders is espousing were the things that the Democratic Party, at the very least, gave voice to And you're seeing that that is not the case at all, especially with all the hysteria around trying to stop that particular guy. The guy, mind you, that the overwhelming majority of Democrats say they idealize his values, meaning they fall in line with his value system. That's the guy they're trying to stop. So what does it mean for never Trumpers in this case? And with Bloomberg's history of misogynistic behavior, vulgarity towards women, outright racist behavior, not to mention the assaults that was taking place by an African-American community being terrorized by the policies he was putting into place. How do these never Trumpers wrap themselves into a knot in order to justify a vote for Bloomberg? And listen who's the voice of reason in this particular back and forth.
Well, that's 2011 on PBS. That's not something he said after a few drinks, like at dinner privately. First of all, that's 2011 on PBS. That's not something he said after a few drinks, like at dinner privately. That's something he said on air. So where there's smoke, there's just one second.
Yeah.
He also there's a lawsuit the Washington Post dug up where he was sued for saying there was a woman who was having trouble finding a nanny for her child, and he said it's a blanking baby. It doesn't know the difference between you and anyone else. All you need is some black who doesn't even have to speak English to rescue it from a burning building.
You know, all I have
this
to
is,
say,
again, this is. But I'm just saying, you want to go up against Trump and you want to take the moral high ground, Democrats. I don't know if this guy is going to be the one.
all I have to say, there are very fine people on.
Yes! Yes! I've never... Meghan McCain, I don't think has ever uttered a word that I thought, good point. Right off the bat, right there, Meghan McCain, good point. Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, they don't want to hear it. They're in the never Trumpers category. And she's pointing out the flagrant hypocrisy associated with this notion that Donald Trump is a racist, Donald Trump is a bigot, Donald Trump is a misogynist, Donald Trump is an abuser, Donald Trump eats puppies, etc., etc. And then they can wrap themselves somehow and come up with a valid argument of saying, but Bloomberg is acceptable. It's mind-blowing. I'm sorry, Bloomberg is worse than Trump. And I know some of you may be shocked by that. Bloomberg is worse than Trump. Why on earth would you put in a plutocrat, effectively a Republican, in order to what? Keep the monsters at bay? I mean, I hate to tell you this, he is the monster that you're talking about keeping at bay. He has all sorts of authoritarian tendencies. The way he went about stopping frisk and then got rid of it in a heartbeat when he just had to come out and just lie to the public saying, yeah, my bad, I didn't mean to, I'm sorry, I hurt a lot of people with that process. The buying of the electoral system, there is nobody clamoring for Bloomberg. Bloomberg, for the most part, is just using his money as a way of getting from point A to point B. Basically, instead of having actual real support of human beings pushing and agitating for a particular candidate, he just gives cash. Why are you okay with that? Like, even if you are probably worried about Trump, fair enough, but why are you okay with that? At the very least, Trump support is legit. This guy is just buying the race. And for whatever reason, they're okay with it. How sad is the day that Meghan McCain is the voice of reason on The View?
Both sides. That was in Charlottesville. He said that removing Confederate monuments was trying to take away our culture.
You want to take the moral high ground.
Belittled the Black Lives Movement.
I don't think Joy gets it. Like, I don't think she understands the problem with this argument. This is not a comparison. Like, this is not a situation where you're saying, all right, well, Bloomberg did all of these horrible things, and he ruined all of these lives with that racist stop and frisk policy. Like, so you have that. But this is not Bloomberg did this and Trump did this, and you're making a comparison. This is a Democratic primary where you have the potential to vote for other people who are in that race. And instead of using that agency to vote for other people in that race and making this point that says this guy is just as bad as Donald Trump, he is fucking horrendous. And the last thing we need to do is put somebody, an oligarch in office who is effectively just trying to buy the race and sew up the party, not because he has popular support, but basically because he wants to stop the actual person with support in the Democratic primary. You are making a comparison between Trump trying to say that Bloomberg is less racist than Trump, and so he's acceptable. Why are you working yourself into this weird argument on who is either less racist or who is less misogynistic when you don't have to make that comparison? Such a weird argument. Such a strange argument. This goes into the corruption argument. The notion that you're going to try to take the high ground with Trump, with a Bloomberg. Yeah, I don't understand the point that you're trying to make in this, considering you still have multiple people in the race and you're making the case for Bloomberg, a Republican, oligarch, sexist, racist, running in the Democratic Party, that you are trying to justify as somehow being better than Trump. That's amazing.
He questioned whether Barack Obama.
I'm not defending Trump because I'm attacking
who are you?
Bloomberg.
What are you saying then? Who are you going to vote
I'm
for?
saying that you're
You said you
shiny,
wouldn't vote for a
sparkly.
Democrat,
I'm
so
saying
who
you're
are you voting
shiny,
for?
sparkly guy who's surging right now. Which, by the way, everybody surges in primary politics.
yeah, I did
remember
point
when
that out
Gingrich
last
did
week.
and Herman Cain did. Every candidate surges at one point or another.
He still thinks that Central Park 5
because
is
he's
guilty.
a sparkly
That's right,
little.
you know.
Because you know what? I just think it's so interesting that you have a problem that we are talking about a candidate the way we would any other candidate. He just happens to be at the top, getting the attention right now, which is why we're talking about it right now. What? I'm supposed to give Bloomberg a pass? Not on this show. Not on this talk.
And yes, she does. Joy Behar does. I find that to be amazing. Like, think about the argument she's making here. She's like, well, Donald Trump said this. Her point was to point out Bloomberg. We're talking about a Democratic primary. They are not in a general election yet. We're talking about a Democratic primary. Bloomberg is in comparison to the other Democrats that are in the race. Meghan McCain points out something that is just true. You guys had all of these issues with Trump on these issues of race and sexuality, et cetera, et cetera. But now Bloomberg gets into the race. He is actively taking policies that have ruined lives, and you're willing to give him a pass. And not just give him a pass. The way you give him a pass is the whataboutism. Well, what about Trump? But we weren't talking about Trump. Trump is almost irrelevant to this particular conversation. You literally brought Trump into this, even though it had nothing to do with the conversation. Like, I hope you get what I mean. And the notion that you're trying to make an argument that, well, Bloomberg is acceptable because he's somehow better than Trump because he is less racist and less sexist. Hey, I don't know if he's less sexist than Trump. From what I've seen, especially from the allegations that have been coming out on Bloomberg and that hostile, vicious work environment and the NDAs that he's been using to essentially muzzle women, I don't know that he's less hostile towards women than Trump. That's that point. In regards to the racist policies that Bloomberg was putting out for the stop and frisk policies, those policies were utterly horrendous. And the notion that anybody would support Bloomberg, especially a person of color after that, is mind-blowing to me. I understand that some people can burn through their integrity because, and like I said, integrity is expensive and Bloomberg has a lot of money, so he can, for the most part, buy that off. But real world support, this argument doesn't fly. She is making a legitimate critique of Bloomberg, and your response to this is for some reason to throw your body on Bloomberg, bringing up Trump as if Trump is somehow relevant to this conversation. She wasn't bringing in Trump. She wasn't defending Trump. In fact, she had nothing to say about Trump at all in this. This was purely about Bloomberg and the hypocrisy associated with the way that you are willing to throw your body out there to protect Bloomberg for pretty much the exact same things that Trump has done. It seems that Trump only really has to just change his sign to a D. I'm a Democrat from here on out. They'll leave him alone. They'll just leave him alone. I just find this argument to be amazing. Meghan McCain, voice of truth on The View.
I'd like to know who you're going to vote for.
It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. You're asking her, like, I just want to know who you're going to vote for. Why? I'm talking about Bloomberg. And you're telling me about Bloomberg and Trump as if Bloomberg has exceeded the primary. Bloomberg hasn't exceeded the primary at all. And I hate to tell you this, Bloomberg would lose to Trump. That's something you would know if you weren't necessarily so stuck in your context that you thought that the rest of the nation was, for the most part, on board with you. The hypocrisy that she is pointing out needs to get something across to you that you would lose a large contingent of the Democratic Party almost overnight, sheared off, making that particular vote, making that particular argument that Bloomberg is less racist, so he's acceptable. The fact that you even have to make the argument about somebody being less racist should get across to you a problem in the framing that you are going with. It's amazing. It's utterly amazing. All right, the debate is about to take place in a few, so I'm going to end this. Guys, I want to thank all of you for joining me. Oh, Crozette Owls. Shout out to Crozette Owls sending me stories, sometimes you hit those stories before I get to them. So shout out. Thank you very much. Let's see. Thank goodness for independent media. Thank you, Jamarl, for your wisdom. Kimberly S. Wisdom is too strong, more so just political opinion, prognostication. At some point, I will be out of sync with reality and my prognostication ability will degrade to some degree. But right now, it seems to be in sync with what is taking place. And I think part of that just, I have a dog in the head from the standpoint of Sanders, but at a certain point, it becomes less about, it becomes more about ideology, if that makes sense. Like, what's more likely to be true when you try to explain it and you try to explain your point of view on why that's true. And in some contexts, a lot of what you say has a lot to do with you and your framing and the way you view the world. And people can get some level of who you are and the way that you try to explain it and argue it. I try to give context. I don't necessarily care about the quote-unquote red-blue treatment. I think both of these parties are effectively the same party, meaning two wings of the same bird, even though they may talk about the stuff in slightly different ways. For the most part, on issues of war, they agree. On issues of economics, meaning this kind of neoliberal politics, they agree. On these trade deals, they agree. They agree. I mean, there's a lot of consensus in Washington. It's just that a lot of the things that they put up in order to fight about are either issues of identity or things that don't necessarily really get at the nub of the economic crisis to deal with the material needs of the people in our society. So it's like, there's a larger context. And I try to get across what that larger context is beyond this notion of political parties. MSNBC is the lowest of the low in the tank for the DNC. Yeah, they burned themselves big time for the DNC. Try to smoke it up before the debate. Yeah, I know, right, Guard? It's like, take your blankets before the debate. Let's have some fun. I really hope I can carry that debate. I got to be honest, though, guys. I've been on air for like 6 hours today. And so I don't know if I'm going to be around for it. But maybe. I mean, I'll see if my energies are up, if I'm still puttering about. I do need to get the monologue straight for in the morning to figure out what we're going to talk about for the show. But also, thank you for joining me on the show. So 12 to 2 every day, Monday through Friday, Political Misfits. We've had 2 episodes so far. I think both episodes have gone really, really well. So we've mentioned before how we get slammed constantly at Radio Sputnik or Radio Sputnik. And one of the things that they would do is they would say, hey, we're going to write a story about you. Do you want to give a statement? Now, we don't know what the story is about. They don't send their reporters there. None of that stuff. They just effectively want to slander us and just give that basic protocol of, we're just going to let you make a statement and then we're just going to run with whatever you come out with. By virtue of whatever we say, they call it Russian propaganda just because it comes from the network, missing the point that what you're saying might actually just be flat fact true, and that you kind of have to engage where the person is. Meaning the goal of this is not to have an actual conversation. It's not to have an actual dialogue. It's not to allow people to get a larger context of the world so you can kind of have that back and forth in regards to what's more accurate and what's more right. No, they just want to slam the network. So I did my monologue today. The monologue was somewhat strong. And somebody calls the channel from International Business Times. And they say, hey, can we get a copy of that monologue? Now, why are you too lazy to either just get it yourself and transcribe it, or find a copy of it from a standpoint of, it's online or whatever else. But the point is, why do they want a copy of that monologue? And I was like, holy shit, what the fuck did I say in that monologue? Which means I went back and I was listening to the show earlier today after I got back off work. The monologue sounds fine, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they won't find something in order to take a shot at the show about. So that's the shit that goes on when these other networks are probing Radio Sputnik. They always, look, all media organizations have a framing of the world. And when they're engaging with us, oftentimes they don't have the courage to sit down and do an interview like having cameras or anything like that. Oftentimes they don't send people to the station in order to talk to the various channels. They would just have this kind of behind the thing, oh, we just want to slander you and we don't necessarily want you to engage in any particular way. So can we just give us a statement? We can just be out here and write our story. It's fucking insane. Absolutely insane. All right, I'm going to end this. Guys, I appreciate you all joining me. P.V. Herman, Flash Gordon. Could be one example of how Jamarl is out of touch on Bernie. No, just one. Yeah, Gardner has his own perspective of Sanders. Him and I disagree on it. So, it just kind of is what it is. Hand over Noam Chomsky manufacturing consent, the order of chaos. I don't think I have that back there. Talk about AIPAC and Jews. Skip Rock. Oh, God. Oh, God. What's going on, Skip? What's going on? John Ralston, the Nevada reporter that is a moderator for the debate. Yes, he's a reporter that claims chairs were being thrown in 2016. Think about that. At the debate tonight, Chuck Todd and the guy who conjured up that story that Sanders supporters were throwing chairs are going to be the moderators for the debate tonight. Think about that. Think about that. Think about that. All right, I'm going to end this. Like, share, subscribe. And guys, again, thank you for joining me for Contributor Appreciation. And also, Monday through Friday, Political Misfits is going to be from 12 to 2 p.m. Feel free to call in. We encourage phone calls. Also, on Friday, we're going to have the episode, the Come At Me Bro episode, which for the most part, issues that you guys might have had with the show, meaning if you disagree with something that was said within the show or during the course of the week, you're free to call in. If there are any media organizations out there that, as opposed to hitting us from the shadows, they want to try their luck, feel free to call in on Friday. They're never going to take me up on that, but that offer is out there. All right, guys, like, share, subscribe, take your bong hits, and enjoy what may actually be a pretty interesting Democratic debate in Nevada. Thanks all. I see you guys tomorrow, likely, but maybe tonight, depending on what happens in that debate and whether or not my energies are up to cover it. Like, share, subscribe.